She dropped to her knees on that train platform and held a stranger's child like he was her own. A boy she'd never met. A boy whose mother was buried 6 months cold in Wyoming dirt. He was shaking so hard his teeth chattered, and he kept saying the same word over and over. Mama. 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 The man who'd promised to marry her was gone. The money she'd borrowed was spent. And the only person in this whole God-forsaken town who wanted her was a 7-year-old boy with tears cutting rivers through the dust on his face. Stay until the end and comment what city you're watching from so I can see how far this story travels. And if you haven't already, subscribe and follow along because this story is just getting started. Clara Whitfield's fingers were bleeding by the time the train pulled into Elk Crossing Station. She'd been gripping the edge of her seat for the last 50 miles, her nails digging into the wood hard enough to split the skin beneath them. She hadn't noticed. There were worse pains than bleeding fingers, and she'd survived most of them. Elk Crossing, 5 minutes! Elk Crossing! She stood before the conductor finished calling. Her legs nearly buckled. 3 days on a train with nothing to eat but stale bread and an apple she'd stolen from a sleeping passenger's bag in Kansas. She wasn't proud of that, but pride didn't fill an empty stomach. "You the mail-order bride?" The woman across the aisle hadn't spoken to her the entire journey. Now she was staring at Clara with the kind of look people gave stray dogs. Pity, mixed with disgust. "Yes, ma'am," Clara said. "Lord have mercy!" The woman shook her head. "Selling yourself to a stranger? Your mama must be turning in her grave." Clara picked up her suitcase. One latch was broken. The leather was cracked. Everything she owned in 26 years of living fit inside it, with room to spare. "My mama's been dead 10 years, Clara said quietly. "She stopped turning a long time ago." She didn't wait for a response. She walked down the aisle with her chin up and her bleeding fingers hidden in the folds of her skirt. She'd learned that trick early. Never let them see you hurt. Never let them see you scared. Never let them see anything they could use against you. The heat hit her like a fist when she stepped off the train. Dry heat. Nothing like Boston's wet, heavy summers that pressed against your skin like a damp cloth. This heat pulled the water right out of you, sucked you dry from the inside out. Clara squinted against the sun and looked for the man she'd traveled 1,000 miles to marry. Garrett Prescott. She'd memorized his letters, 4 of them. The first one had been beautiful, poetic almost. He'd written about wide skies and fresh starts and a ranch where she'd never have to answer to anyone again. The last 3 had been short, practical, lists of what to bring, instructions for the journey. She'd read those letters so many times the paper had gone soft at the creases. Nobody was waiting for her. Clara stood on that platform and watched every other passenger find their people. A young woman ran into the arms of a man who lifted her clean off the ground. An old couple walked slowly toward a wagon where a boy was waving both arms. A family. A father scooping up his daughter. A mother kissing her son's forehead. Everyone had someone. Clara had a broken suitcase and $17. "You waiting on someone, miss?" She turned. A young station worker, maybe 19, with a face full of freckles and a cap that was too big for his head. "Garrett Prescott," Clara said. "He was supposed to meet me here." The boy's face did something complicated. Recognition first, then something darker. He took off his cap and twisted it in his hands. "Mr. Prescott, ma'am?" "Yes. Do you know him? Do you know where he is?" "Well, The boy looked at his feet. "I reckon you better talk to someone else about that. I ain't the one to say." "Say what?" Clara's voice went sharp. "What is it you ain't the one to say?" "Billy, that's enough." A woman's voice cut across the platform. Clara turned to see a gray-haired woman in a stiff dress marching toward them. She had the kind of face that looked like it had been carved from the same wood as the station walls. Hard, weathered, built to last. "I'm Alma Beckett," the woman said. "I run the general store, and you must be the latest one." "The latest what?" Mrs. Beckett's mouth pressed into a thin line. "The latest bride Garrett Prescott ordered from back east. You're the fourth one in 2 years, honey." The platform tilted under Clara's feet. She put her hand on a post to steady herself. "Fourth? The first girl lasted a week before she ran. Second one, he took her money and she never saw him again. Third one," Mrs. Beckett paused, and something hard flickered across her face.
"Third one, we don't talk about."
"Where is he?" Clara heard herself ask. Her voice sounded far away, like it belonged to someone else. "Where is Garrett Prescott right now?" "Nobody knows. Left town 3 days ago. Took his horse and whatever cash he had and rode south. Might be in Denver by now. Might be further." 3 days. He'd been gone 3 days. He'd known she was coming. She'd sent a telegram. He'd read it, and he'd left anyway. Clara stood very still on that platform. She did not cry. She did not scream. She did not fall down, although her body wanted to do all three. Instead, she did what she'd always done when the world kicked her in the teeth. She breathed in. She breathed out. She calculated. $17. No return ticket. No one in Boston who'd take her back. Mrs. Henley's boarding house had already rented her room to someone else. She had nowhere to go, no one to call, nothing to fall back on. "Is there work in this town?" Clara asked. Mrs. Beckett blinked. "That's your first question? Not, how could he, or what'll I do? Just, is there work?" "Crying won't feed me, ma'am. Work might." Something shifted in the older woman's face. Not softness exactly. More like the kind of respect one survivor gives another. Not much work for a woman alone in Elk Crossing. "There's the saloon, but you don't want that. There's laundry work, but it pays pennies. I could use help at the store, but I can't afford to hire nobody. Then what do you suggest I do?" Before Mrs. Beckett could answer, a sound cut through the platform noise. A child's voice, high and desperate, screaming above the hiss of steam and the murmur of strangers. "Papa! Papa, look! Look at her! Look!" Clara turned toward the voice and saw a boy running straight at her. Small, thin, dark hair wild in every direction. Face streaked with dust and tears, and eyes. Lord, those eyes. Brown and deep, and full of something so raw and hungry, it made Clara's chest crack open. Behind him, a tall man was trying to catch him. "Noah! Noah, stop! Come back here right now!" The boy didn't stop. He ran like his life depended on it, dodging between grown-ups, his boots slapping the wooden planks. And he hit Clara with the full force of a 7-year-old body moving at top speed. His arms locked around her waist, his face buried in her dress. His whole body shook against hers. "Mama," he gasped. "Mama, you came back. I knew you'd come back. I prayed every night, and you came back." Clara couldn't move. Her hands hovered above the boy's head, frozen. She could feel him trembling. Could feel the bones of his ribs through his shirt. Could feel the desperate strength of his grip, like he was holding on to the edge of a cliff. The tall man caught up. He was breathing hard, his face red beneath a week's worth of dark beard. His eyes were nearly black, set deep in a face that looked like it hadn't smiled in a very long time. He reached for the boy's shoulder. "Noah." "Son, let go. She's not. That's not." "She is!" Noah screamed, and his voice broke on the word. "She looks just like Mama. She has Mama's eyes. Papa, why can't you see?" The man's hands stopped. His eyes met Clara's, and she saw it hit him. Whatever resemblance his son was seeing, the father saw it too. His face went pale, his jaw clenched, and for a moment, just one moment, something terrible and beautiful passed through his expression. Hope and horror tangled together. Then he shut it down, closed it off like a man slamming a door against a storm. "Noah," he said, his voice rough, "your mama's gone. We've talked about this. She's in heaven and she's not coming back. This lady is a stranger." "She's not a stranger. She is." The man knelt down and took his son by the shoulders. Clara could see his hands shaking. "Look at me, son. Look at my eyes. This woman is not your mama. I need you to understand that. Can you understand that for me?" Noah looked at his father. Then he looked up at Clara. His lower lip trembled. The hope in his eyes didn't die. It just broke, like a plate dropped on stone, shattering into pieces too small to put back together. "But she looks just like her," Noah whispered. "She looks just like the picture you keep in your drawer." Clara knelt down. She didn't plan to. Her body just did it, the way a body moves toward a fire in winter. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Noah," barely a whisper. "Noah Hawkins." "Noah, I'm Clara. Clara Whitfield. I'm not your mama, but I can see you love her very much. Can you tell me about her?" "She was pretty," Noah said, and the tears came now, rolling down his dust-streaked face. "She was the prettiest lady in the whole town. And she smelled like bread and lavender. And she used to sing to me when the wind got loud at night." "She sounds wonderful." "She was." Noah swallowed hard. "And then she got the fever, and Papa carried her to town in the snow. But the doctor said she was too sick, and she died. And Papa cried, and he never cries. And now, nobody sings to me anymore." Clara felt her heart breaking in real time. Actually, physically felt it, like something tearing inside her chest. She'd been alone since she was 16. She'd been hungry and scared and desperate more times than she could count. But she'd never heard anything as devastating as a 7-year-old boy explaining his mother's death in one long run-on sentence. Because if he stopped talking, he'd fall apart. "I'm sorry," she said, and she meant it with everything she had. "I'm so sorry, Noah." The tall man, Jesse Hawkins. He was watching Clara with an expression she couldn't read. His eyes were wet, but he wasn't crying. Men like him probably didn't let themselves cry where people could see. "I apologize, ma'am," he said. "He does this sometimes. Sees a dark-haired woman and he thinks—" He stopped, swallowed. "My wife Hannah passed last winter, 18 months ago now. He still looks for her." "Don't apologize," Clara said. "He's grieving. There's nothing wrong with that." Jesse's eyes flickered with surprise. Most people probably told him to get the boy under control, to make him stop making scenes, to teach him that death was something you accepted quietly and privately. "I don't suppose you're being met by someone," Jesse said, and there was a careful neutrality in his voice. Mrs. Beckett answered before Clara could. "She's Prescott's latest victim. Mail-order bride. He ran off 3 days ago." Jesse's face went dark. "Prescott." "You know him," Clara said. It wasn't a question. "I know him well enough to know you're better off without him. He's a liar, a cheat, and worse things I won't say in front of my boy." "That's what everyone keeps telling me." Clara stood up, brushing dust from her skirt. "Better off." Except better off doesn't come with a roof or a meal. And right now, those would be more useful than everyone's low opinion of Garrett Prescott. Jesse stared at her. Then, For the first time, the ghost of something that wasn't quite a smile crossed his face. "You always this direct?" "I can't afford to be anything else." Noah had gone quiet. He was standing between them, looking up at Clara with those broken, hopeful eyes, his small hand reaching out to touch the fabric of her sleeve. Not grabbing, just touching. Like he needed to make sure she was real. "Papa," Noah said quietly, "she's got nowhere to go." "I know, son." "We got the extra room." "Noah, Mama would have helped her. You know she would. Mama helped everybody." Jesse closed his eyes. Clara watched him wrestling with something inside himself. Grief and duty and fear and whatever was left of the man he'd been before he buried his wife in frozen ground. "Mrs. Beckett," he said, not opening his eyes, "is there anywhere in town this woman could stay tonight?" "Not that she could afford," Mrs. Beckett said bluntly. "I'd offer my spare room, but I've got my sister visiting from Cheyenne." Jesse opened his eyes and looked at Clara. Really looked. Taking her measure the way a rancher sizes up a horse. Not her body, her character, her spine. The way she held herself, even though everything had fallen apart around her. "I need help at the ranch," he said slowly. "The house hasn't been properly kept since Hannah died. I can't cook worth a damn. Eli eats more beans than any boy should. The place is falling apart, and I'm barely keeping up with the cattle and the fences as it is." "Are you offering me a job?" Clara asked. "Room and board, $20 a month, separate quarters. You'd be the housekeeper, nothing more. I'll have Mrs. Beckett check on things regular, so there's no question about the arrangement being proper." "You don't know me," Clara said. "I could be anybody. I could rob you blind in the night." "Could you?" "No, I didn't think so." Jessie picked up her suitcase before she could stop him. He tested its weight and frowned. "This all you got?" "I travel light." He set his hat more firmly on his head. "Wagon's at the general store. It's 15 miles to the ranch. You coming or not?" Clara looked at this man, this stranger with his dead wife's memory carved into every line of his face, and his son clinging to a woman who looked like a ghost. She was being offered a lifeline by someone who had no reason to throw one. Every instinct she developed in 12 years of surviving alone screamed at her to be suspicious. Nobody gave something for nothing. There was always a cost, always a trap. But Noah was looking up at her with those eyes, and Jessie was holding her broken suitcase like it was something worth carrying. And the train behind her was already pulling away, taking with it the last connection to the life she'd been running from. "I'm coming," she said. Noah's hand slipped into hers, small fingers, warm and sticky, gripping tight. She didn't pull away. They walked off that platform together, the woman with nothing, the man with too much grief, the boy who'd found his dead mother's face in a stranger and refused to let go. Mrs. Beckett watched them leave. She folded her arms across her chest and shook her head slowly. But Clara caught something in the older woman's expression as she glanced back. Not disapproval, not pity, something closer to prayer. The wagon ride was long and quiet. Clara sat on the bench with Noah pressed against her side, and Jessie handling the reins without looking at either of them. The land stretched out forever, grass and sky and nothing else. No buildings, no people. No sound but the wheels creaking and the wind moving through the grass like something alive. "It's empty," Clara said. "It's honest," Jessie replied. "Nothing out here pretends to be something it's not." "Your wife liked it here?" His hands tightened on the reins. "Hannah loved it. Said the sky was big enough to hold all her thoughts." He paused. "She was the school teacher, only one for 30 miles. Taught every child in the territory how to read. taught Noah his letters before he could walk proper. "Mama could spell every word in the dictionary," Noah said proudly. "Not every word," Jesse corrected. And there it was again, that almost smile. The ghost of the man he used to be. "Tell me about the ranch," Clara said. Not because she cared about cattle and fences, but because she could hear the silence threatening to swallow them all. 160 acres, 50 head of cattle, give or take, a few horses, chickens that Noah's supposed to feed but mostly forgets. "I don't forget," Noah protested. "I just sometimes remember late." "That's forgetting with extra steps, son." Clara felt her mouth twitch. She hadn't smiled in weeks, maybe months. The muscles felt rusty. "The house needs work," Jesse continued, his voice going flat again. "Everything needs work. I've been trying to do it all myself since Hannah passed, and He stopped. "I'm not managing." 3 words. "I'm not managing." From a man like Jesse Hawkins, those words cost more than gold. Clara understood what it took for a man who'd been raised to be strong and silent and self-sufficient to admit out loud that he was drowning. "Then it's a good thing I'm here," she said simply. Jesse looked at her sideways, studying, measuring. "You always this calm when your whole world falls apart?" "My world's been falling apart since I was 15. You get used to it, or you don't survive." "How old are you?" 26. "You talk like you're 60. "I've lived like I'm 60. Jesse was quiet for a long time after that. The wagon rolled on. The sun dropped lower, turning the grass into gold. Noah had fallen asleep against Clara's arm, his breathing slow and steady, his hand still holding hers even in sleep. Clara looked down at the sleeping boy, at his thin face and his dirty fingernails, and the way his mouth curved slightly upward, even in rest, like somewhere in his dreams his mother was still alive and singing to him. Something she'd kept locked down for years. Something hard and protected and carefully walled off. It shifted inside her chest, not breaking, not yet, but loosening, making room for something she didn't have a name for. The ranch appeared just before sunset. Clara saw the house first. A 2-story structure with a wraparound porch, curtains in the windows, a garden out front that had gone wild with neglect. Then the barn, the corral, the scattered outbuildings. It wasn't fancy, it wasn't grand, but someone had loved this place once. Someone had planted flowers and hung curtains and built a swing from the porch beam. Someone had turned this patch of Wyoming dirt into a home. And then that someone had died, and everything she'd built had started slowly falling apart. "We're here," Jesse said, pulling the wagon to a stop. Noah woke instantly, like children do, going from dead sleep to full alert in half a second. "We're home!" He scrambled down from the wagon and stood looking up at Clara. "This is where you live now." "This is where I work," Clara corrected gently. "For now." "For now," Noah repeated, but the way he said it sounded like forever. Jesse came around to help her down. His hand was rough and warm. She could feel every callus, every scar, every ridge of hard work pressed into his palm. He held on a beat longer than necessary, then let go like he'd been burned. "Your room's upstairs," he said. "Second door on the right." It was. He stopped. It was the guest room. "Thank you." "Don't thank me yet." He grabbed her suitcase from the wagon. "You haven't tasted my cooking." "That bad?" "Noah's been living on burned beans and hope for 18 months. Make of that what you will." Clara followed him up the porch steps. Noah ran ahead, throwing the door open, turning back to make sure she was still coming. Still real. Still there. She stepped through the doorway and into a house that smelled like dust and absence, and the faintest memory of lavender. Somewhere in these walls, Hannah Hawkins had lived and laughed and died. Somewhere in these rooms, a man had carried his wife's body out the door and come back to an empty bed. Somewhere in this silence, a boy had stopped hearing his mother's voice and started listening for it in every woman who walked past. Clara set her jaw and rolled up her sleeves. She'd come to Wyoming to marry a liar. Instead, she'd found a broken man, a grieving boy, and a house full of ghosts. It wasn't the life she'd planned. It wasn't even close. But Clara Whitfield had stopped planning a long time ago. She'd learned to work with what she was given, and right now, she was being given a chance. She intended to take it. Clara didn't sleep that first night. She lay in the narrow bed in the guest room and listened to the house breathe around her. Every creak of wood, every whisper of wind, every sound that wasn't the noise of Boston she'd grown used to over 12 years. Somewhere down the hall, she heard Jesse's footsteps, pacing, back and forth. A man who couldn't sleep either. Around midnight, a different sound. Small feet padding across the hallway floor. Her door opened, just a crack, and she saw Noah's face in the gap. Eyes wide, lower lip caught between his teeth. "Clara?" His voice was barely a breath. "I'm here, sweetheart. I just wanted to make sure. I'm not going anywhere tonight. I promised, remember? People break promises." The words hit Clara somewhere deep. She sat up in bed. "Come here." Noah crossed the room in 3 quick steps and climbed onto the edge of the bed. He didn't get under the covers, just sat there with his knees pulled to his chest, looking at her in the dark. "Mama promised she'd get better," he said. "She held my hand and she said, 'I'll be right as rain by Sunday, little man.' That's what she called me. Little man." "What happened?" "She died on Saturday." Clara closed her eyes, breathed in, breathed out. "Noah, I can't promise I'll never leave. I don't know what's going to happen tomorrow or next week. But I can promise you this. If I ever have to go, I'll tell you first. I won't just disappear. Can that be enough?" Noah thought about it. Really thought, the way children do when they're deciding whether to trust someone with the most important thing they own. "Okay," he said finally. "That's enough." He slid off the bed and padded back to the door. Then he stopped. "Clara?" "Yes?" "You do look like her. I wasn't making it up." "I know you weren't." He left, pulling the door closed behind him, and Clara pressed her hand against her chest where something had shifted again. That locked-down thing, that guarded, protected, walled-off thing that she'd spent years building to keep herself safe. It was cracking. She was up before dawn, muscle memory from 12 years of rising early at Mrs. Henley's boarding house. She dressed in her other dress, the blue cotton, pinned her hair back, and went downstairs. The kitchen was a disaster. Dishes piled in the sink, flour dusted across the counter, a pot of something crusted and black sitting on the stove like evidence of a crime. Clara rolled up her sleeves and started with the dishes. By the time Jessie came downstairs, the kitchen was clean, coffee was brewing, and Clara had found enough supplies to start biscuits. He stopped in the doorway and stared. "You didn't have to do all this." "I know." "I mean it. You traveled 3 days. You got the worst news of your life yesterday. You should be resting." "Mr. Hawkins, if I stopped working every time I got bad news, I'd never have gotten out of bed." She poured him a cup of coffee without asking if he wanted one. "Sit down. Biscuits in 10 minutes." He sat. He wrapped both hands around the cup and watched her move through his kitchen like she'd always been there, opening drawers, finding things, making sense of the chaos he'd been living in. "You found Hannah's recipe tin," he said quietly, watching her measure flour. Clara's hands stilled. She looked at the small metal box she'd pulled from the back of a shelf. Recipes written in neat, careful handwriting. A schoolteacher's hand. "I'm sorry. I should have asked before going through her things." "No," Jesse shook his head. "She'd want someone using them. She always said recipes were meant to be shared, not hoarded." Clara opened the tin and looked at the first card. Buttermilk biscuits.
The handwriting was beautiful. At the bottom, in smaller letters, Hannah had written, "Jesse's favorite. Add extra butter. He won't admit it, but he has a sweet tooth." Clara's throat tightened. She closed the tin and set it aside. "I'll use my own recipes for now, if that's all right." "Whatever you want." Jesse took a long drink of coffee. "Clara, we should talk about how this works. The arrangement." "All right." "I'm up at 5. Work the ranch till sundown. I'll handle the stock, the fences, the heavy work. You handle the house, the cooking, the garden if you want to try bringing it back. It's your domain. I won't interfere." "And Noah?" "He's got chores, chickens, wood for the stove, helping me when I need an extra pair of hands. He should be doing his letters, too. Hannah was teaching him before she..." Jesse stared into his coffee. "He hasn't touched a book since she died. I tried. He won't do it for me." "Maybe he'll do it for me." "Maybe." Jesse met her eyes. "But Clara, don't let him get too attached. You might not stay forever. I don't want him hurt worse than he already is."
"I understand." "Do you?" Jesse's voice went low. "Because what he did at that station yesterday, the way he grabbed onto you, that's not normal. That's a boy who's been broken in half and can't find the other piece. If you give him hope and then take it away, it'll destroy what's left of him." The words were hard, almost accusatory. But Clara heard what was underneath them. A father terrified of watching his son break again. A man who'd already failed to protect the person he loved most, and couldn't survive failing again. "I won't play games with your son's heart," Clara said firmly. "I'm here to work. I'll be kind to him because that's who I am. But I won't pretend to be something I'm not." Jesse studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded, once, sharp. "Fair enough." Noah appeared 5 minutes later, sleep-creased and wild-haired, and the look on his face when he saw Clara at the stove almost undid her. Pure, radiant relief. She was still here. She was real. She was making breakfast. "Biscuits!" he shouted, scrambling into his chair. "Real biscuits! Papa, she made real biscuits!" "I can see that, son. Not burned ones." "Thank you, Noah. I'm aware of the difference." Clara set a plate in front of the boy and watched him tear into a biscuit with the single-minded focus of a child who'd been eating burned beans for a year and a half. Butter ran down his chin. He didn't care. "These are good," Jesse said, and the surprise in his voice would have been insulting if Clara didn't understand it. He'd stopped expecting good things, stopped believing they could just appear without a price attached. "It's just flour and butter," Clara said. "It's the first decent meal in this kitchen since Hannah died." They ate in silence after that, but it wasn't an empty silence. It was the kind that happens when people are too busy being grateful to find words. The days fell into a rhythm. Clara scrubbed and swept and cooked and mended. She attacked the house with the ferocity of someone who needed to prove her worth. She washed curtains that hadn't been touched in 18 months. She beat rugs. She organized shelves. She found Hannah's things everywhere. A hairbrush on the mantel, a shawl draped over a chair, a half-finished letter on the desk in the bedroom, the ink long dry, the words frozen in mid-sentence. She didn't move any of it. Not yet. That wasn't her call to make. On the third day, Noah brought her wildflowers, a fistful of purple and yellow blooms, roots still attached, dirt falling from his fingers onto the clean floor she'd just swept. "These are for you," he said, "for making the house smell good again." "Thank you, sweetheart. They're beautiful." Mama used to put flowers on the table every Sunday. She said a table without flowers was like a sky without stars. Pretty, but incomplete. Clara found a jar, filled it with water, and set the flowers on the kitchen table. Noah stood back and admired them, with his hands on his hips, looking so much like a tiny old man that Clara had to bite her lip to keep from laughing. "Perfect," Noah declared. "Now it's a real home again." That evening, after Noah was in bed, Clara found Jesse on the porch. He was sitting in a rocking chair with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands, staring at nothing. "He brought me flowers today," Clara said, sitting in the other chair. Hannah's chair, she suspected, but didn't ask. "I saw. He said his mama used to put flowers on the table every Sunday." "She did." Jessie's voice was rough. "She could make anything beautiful. Didn't matter how hard things got, how tight money was, how long the winter lasted. She'd find some way to make the house feel like it mattered. Like we mattered." "You still matter, Jessie." He looked at her sharply, like she'd said something dangerous. "I mean it," Clara pressed. "That boy in there thinks the world of you. The way he watches you when you're not looking, the way he copies how you walk, how you hold your fork, how you tip your hat. He's building himself in your image." "Then God help him," Jessie muttered, "because the image ain't much to aspire to these days." "Stop that." "Stop what?" "Stop talking like you're already dead. You're not in that grave with Hannah. You're here. Your son needs you here. All of you. Not just the shell that goes through the motions." Jesse's cup stopped halfway to his mouth. His eyes narrowed. "You've known me 4 days. I've known men like you my whole life. Strong men who think strength means suffering alone. My father was that kind of strong. He suffered alone right into a bottle, and then right out the door. Left my mother to die of exhaustion working 3 jobs. Left me with nothing. I'm not your father." "No, you're better, because you stayed. But staying isn't enough if you're not really present." Noah can feel the difference. The silence that followed was long and dangerous. Clara half expected him to tell her to pack her suitcase, to remind her she was the help, not a counselor, not a friend, not anything but a woman who cooked his meals and swept his floors. Instead, Jessie said, "Hannah used to say that too, that I disappeared inside myself when things got hard. She called it my cave." "Smart woman." "Smarter than me, that's certain." "That's a low bar from what I've seen." Jesse's head turned. He stared at her, and then something extraordinary happened. He laughed. A short, rough sound, like a machine that hadn't been used in so long it creaked. But it was real. It was genuine, and it transformed his face completely. "Did you just insult me?" he asked. "I just agreed with your own assessment of yourself. If that's insulting, the problem's with the assessment." He shook his head slowly. "You're something else, Clara Whitfield." "It's the only thing I've ever been." They sat on that porch until the stars came out, talking about nothing important. The cattle, the weather, the fact that the barn roof needed patching before winter. Normal things. Ordinary things. The kind of conversation that happens between people who are slowly, carefully, learning to share space without hurting each other. By the end of the first week, the house had changed. Not just physically, though Clara had scrubbed it within an inch of its life. The feeling had changed. There was warmth now where there'd been emptiness. Noise where there'd been silence. The smell of bread baking and coffee brewing and clean sheets drying in the wind. Noah started sleeping through the night. He stopped checking Clara's room at midnight. He started leaving his drawings on the kitchen table for her to find. Horses mostly, and stick figures. A tall one, a short one, and a medium one standing in front of a house. Family. On the 8th day, Clara found him sitting on the porch with a book in his lap. Hannah's reading primer. He was staring at the pages like they were written in a foreign language. "Want some help?" Clara asked, sitting beside him. "Papa tried to teach me, but he reads the words wrong. Not wrong exactly, but not how Mama did. She made the letters sound like songs. Papa makes them sound like orders." Clara bit back a smile. "How about I try? I might not make them sound like songs, but I won't make them sound like orders either." Noah handed her the book. Their fingers touched, and he looked up at her with those brown eyes. "Clara?" "Yes?" "I know you're not my mama. I know that. I'm not stupid." "I never thought you were." "But could you? Could you be something? Not my mama, but something? Like an aunt or a big sister or just something?" Clara's vision blurred. She blinked hard. "I think I'd like that very much." Noah smiled. Not the desperate, hopeful smile from the train platform. A real one. Small and steady and warm. The smile of a boy who was learning that you could lose someone and still find something worth holding on to. They were sitting together, working through the letter C, when Jesse rode in from the east pasture. He dismounted, tied his horse, and walked toward the porch with a heaviness in his step that hadn't been there that morning. "What's wrong?" Clara asked immediately. Jesse looked at Noah. "Son, go check on the chickens." "I already checked on them." "Check again." Noah knew that tone. He closed his book, gave Clara a worried look, and went around the back of the house. Jesse climbed the porch steps and stood in front of Clara with his hat in his hands. His face was drawn tight. His jaw worked like he was chewing on words he didn't want to swallow. "I rode out to the eastern fence line today," he said. "Ran into Tom Whitaker from the Double Diamond Ranch. And Garrett Prescott didn't go to Denver." Clara's stomach dropped. "Where is he?" "Whitaker saw him 2 days ago at the trading post in Cedar Flat. That's 30 miles east. He's been there all week. Drinking. Talking." Jesse paused. "Talking about you." "About me?" "About the bride who was supposed to be his. About how she ran off to live with a widower up the creek. About how he's got a contract and he means to enforce it." Clara stood slowly. Her hands were steady. Her voice was steady. Everything she'd trained herself to control was perfectly controlled. But inside, something cold and familiar was spreading through her chest. The old fear. The one that had lived in her bones since she was 16 years old and learned that the world was not safe for a woman alone. "He signed a letter," she said carefully. "I signed a letter. It was an agreement to marry, not a bill of sale." "I know that. You know that. But Prescott's telling everyone who'll listen that you're legally his, that you took his money for the train fare." "I didn't take a cent from him. I borrowed that money from Mrs. Henley in Boston. Every penny." "I believe you." Jesse stepped closer. His voice dropped low. "But Clara, this town doesn't know you. They know Prescott. He's been here 3 years. He's got money. He buys drinks at the saloon, and he tips his hat to the ladies, and he goes to church on Sundays with a Bible under his arm. Half the town thinks he's a gentleman." "And the other half?" "The other half knows better, but won't say so because his money keeps the saloon running, and his cattle trade keeps the market busy." Clara wrapped her arms around herself. Not from cold, from the feeling of walls closing in. She'd come 1,000 miles to escape a life where she had no power, no voice, no choice. And here she was again, a woman alone against a man with money and connections and the willingness to lie. "What do you think he'll do?" she asked. "I think he'll come here. Probably not alone. He'll bring papers, real or fake. He'll make demands. He'll try to take you." "He can't take me. I'm not property." "No, you're not." Jesse's voice hardened. "And I will kill any man who tries to drag you off this ranch against your will." The words landed between them like a thrown stone. Clara stared at him. Jesse stared back. And something passed between them in that moment, something neither of them was ready to name. Not gratitude, not attraction. Something rawer than both. The recognition of two people who'd been fighting alone for so long they'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone stand beside them. "You don't have to do that," Clara whispered. "Yeah," Jesse said. "I do." "Why? You barely know me." Jesse put his hat back on his head. He took a step back, like he needed the distance. "Because my son thinks you hung the moon. Because you cleaned my house and cooked for my boy and sat on this porch and told me the truth when everyone else just tells me they're sorry. Because you're under my roof, which means you're under my protection, and I don't take that lightly." That's a lot of weight to carry for a stranger. "You stopped being a stranger the minute you knelt down on that platform and talked to my boy like he was worth talking to." Jesse turned and walked toward the barn. Clara watched him go. His shoulders were squared. His stride was long and steady. A man walking toward a fight he hadn't asked for, but would not back away from. She pressed her hand to her chest again. That cracking thing. That locked down, walled off, carefully protected thing. It wasn't just cracking anymore. It was breaking open. And Clara Whitfield, who had survived everything life had thrown at her by never letting anyone get close enough to hurt her, stood on that porch in the Wyoming wind and realized she was terrified. Not of Garrett Prescott. Not of being dragged away or threatened or harmed. She'd survived worse than that, and she'd survive it again. She was terrified of the man walking toward the barn, of his rough honesty and his quiet strength, and his son who called her something. Of the way Jesse Hawkins looked at her like she mattered, like she was worth protecting, like she was worth fighting for. Nobody had ever thought she was worth fighting for, and that scared her more than anything Garrett Prescott could ever do. Garrett Prescott came on the 10th morning, and he didn't come alone. Clara was kneading bread when she heard the horses. Not one, several. The sound carried different across the flat land, heavier, like the ground itself was warning her. She wiped her hands on her apron and looked out the kitchen window. 5 riders coming from the east. The one in front sat his horse like he owned the sky above it. "Jesse!" she called out, and her voice came sharp enough to cut glass. He appeared from the barn in seconds. He'd been mucking stalls, his shirt damp with sweat, his sleeves rolled to the elbows. But the moment he saw the riders, everything about him changed. His spine went straight, his jaw locked. His hand dropped to his hip where a gun would have been if he'd been wearing one. "Get Noah," he said. "Take him upstairs. Lock the bedroom door." "Jesse, I'm not hiding while you—" "Clara." He turned and looked at her, and his eyes were darker than she'd ever seen them. Not angry. Afraid. "Please, if this goes wrong, Noah needs you alive. Not me. You." The words hit her like cold water. She wanted to argue, wanted to stand beside him and face whatever was coming because she was tired of running and tired of hiding and tired of being the kind of woman who let other people fight her battles. But Noah, that boy with the brown eyes and the wildflowers and the way he said her name like it was something precious. "Don't you dare get yourself killed," she said. "Wasn't planning on it." She ran. Found Noah in the chicken coop counting eggs. She grabbed his hand and pulled him toward the house without explaining, because the look on her face was explanation enough. Noah didn't ask questions. He'd seen that look before. On the day his mother got too sick to stand. On the day his father carried her body to town in the snow. He knew what fear looked like on a woman's face. Clara locked them in Jesse's bedroom. She positioned herself at the window where she could see the yard below. Noah pressed against her side, and she could feel him shaking. "Is it the bad man?" Noah whispered.
The one Papa told the sheriff about? Yes. Is Papa going to be okay? Your Papa is the toughest man I've ever met. He'll be fine. She didn't know if that was true. She watched Jesse walk to the center of the yard and stand there with his arms crossed and his feet planted wide. Alone, unarmed, facing 5 men on horseback. Garrett Prescott dismounted first. Clara could see him clearly now, and everything about him made her skin crawl. The expensive clothes, the waxed mustache, the way he moved, slow and deliberate, like a man who'd never been told no in his life, and couldn't imagine it starting today. "Turner!" Prescott's voice carried up to the window. Pleasant, conversational, like he was greeting a neighbor at church. "Fine morning, isn't it? I've come for what's mine." "Nothing here belongs to you, Prescott." "I disagree." Prescott pulled a folded paper from his vest pocket and held it up. "I've got a signed contract that says otherwise." Miss Whitfield agreed to be my wife. She traveled here on my dime, and now I find her living in another man's house. That's breach of contract at best, theft at worst. She didn't take a cent from you. That's not what the paper says. Then the paper's a lie, same as everything else that comes out of your mouth. Prescott's smile didn't waver, but something behind his eyes went cold. "Careful, Turner. I came here civil. I brought witnesses." He gestured to the 4 men behind him, rough-looking characters, hired muscle, pretending to be upstanding citizens. "All I want is my bride. Hand her over, and we'll leave peaceful." "She's not your bride. She's not your anything. She's a free woman who works for me, and she's made it real clear she wants nothing to do with you." "I don't recall asking what she wants." Prescott took a step closer. "Women don't always know what's best for them. That's why God gave them husbands." Clara's hands clenched into fists. She could feel Noah pressing harder against her, his small body rigid with fear. "Papa won't let him take you," Noah said, but his voice trembled. "Papa won't let him." Down in the yard, Jesse hadn't moved, hadn't flinched. He stood there like a fence post, solid and immovable. And when he spoke, his voice was low and steady. "I'm going to say this once, Prescott. Get back on your horse. Ride off my land. Don't come back. Because if you take one more step toward my house, toward anyone in it, I will put you in the ground and sleep like a baby afterward." The 4 hired men shifted on their horses. Hands moved toward gun belts. The air went tight, like the moment before a storm breaks. Prescott laughed, a smooth, oiled sound that made Clara's stomach turn. "Threats? Really, Turner? In front of witnesses? My! No wonder your wife couldn't wait to leave you. Oh, wait." He put a hand to his chest in mock sympathy. "She didn't leave, did she? She died. How inconvenient for you." Jesse moved so fast Clara barely saw it. One moment he was standing still. The next he had Prescott by the collar, lifted half off his feet, his face inches from the other man's. "Say her name," Jesse snarled. "Say my wife's name, and I'll break every bone in your face." Prescott's men were off their horses in seconds. 2 of them grabbed Jesse from behind, wrenching his arms back. A third drew his gun and pointed it at Jesse's head.
Clara pressed her hand over her mouth to keep from screaming. "Let him go!" she heard herself shout through the window. Every head in the yard snapped up. Prescott straightened his collar, smoothed his vest, and looked up at the window with a smile that made Clara's blood freeze. "There she is," he said sweetly. "My blushing bride. Why don't you come down here, darling, and we can settle this like civilized people?" "I'd rather settle it like uncivilized people," Clara shot back. "Starting with the fact that you're trespassing on private property with armed men. That's not a contract dispute. That's a raid." "Such spirit!" Prescott shook his head admiringly. "I knew I chose well when I picked you from those letters. You've got fire, Miss Whitfield. I like fire. It's so much fun to put out." Jesse was struggling against the two men holding him. Blood was running from his lip where someone had hit him. His eyes were fixed on the window, on Clara, and she could read every word he wasn't saying. Run. Hide. Protect Noah. Don't come down here. But Clara was done hiding. "Noah," she said quietly, "I need you to do something brave for me." The boy looked up at her, terrified, trusting. "I need you to go out the back, through the kitchen. Don't let them see you. Run to the Whitaker Ranch as fast as you can and tell Mr. Whitaker what's happening. Tell him to get the sheriff." "I can't leave you." "You're not leaving me. You're saving me, just like you saved me that day at the train station when you ran to me. You're the bravest boy I know, Noah. Can you be brave one more time?" Noah's chin quivered. His eyes were swimming. But he nodded, fierce and determined, looking so much like his father that Clara's heart nearly shattered. "Go, now, fast as you can." Noah slipped out of the bedroom without a sound. Clara listened to his small feet on the stairs, through the kitchen, out the back door. Gone. Running across the prairie on 7-year-old legs toward help that might come too late. She turned back to the window. "I'm coming down," she called. "Clara, no!" Jesse shouted. "It's all right." She said it to Jesse, but she was looking at Prescott. "Let's settle this." She walked down the stairs with her back straight and her chin up. Her hands were shaking, so she pressed them flat against her skirt. She'd survived 12 years in a Boston boarding house where men twice her size tried to break down her door at night. She'd survived poverty and hunger and loneliness so profound it sometimes felt like drowning. She could survive Garrett Prescott. The front door opened, and she stepped into the yard. Jesse was still held by two men, blood on his face, fury in his eyes. The third man with the gun turned it toward her now, casual, almost lazy, like pointing a weapon at a woman was something he did before breakfast. "There's my girl," Prescott said, opening his arms wide. "I knew you'd come to your senses." "I haven't come to my senses. I've come to give you mine." Clara stopped 6 feet from him, close enough to see the cruelty behind his charming mask, close enough to smell his cologne, expensive and cloying, covering up whatever rot was underneath. "I'm not going with you," she said clearly. "Not today. Not ever. I don't care what paper you wave around. I signed a letter agreeing to a marriage arrangement. You violated that arrangement by failing to meet me at the station. You abandoned me in a town where I knew no one. Any obligation I had to you ended the moment you chose not to honor yours." "That's not how contracts work, sweetheart." "Don't call me sweetheart. You don't have the right." Prescott's smile thinned. "You're making this harder than it needs to be. Good. You've spent your whole life making things easy for yourself, lying to women, taking their money, discarding them when they stop being useful. How many before me, Garrett? 3? 5? How many women did you trick with your pretty letters and your promises of fresh starts?" Something flickered across Prescott's face. Surprise, maybe. He hadn't expected her to know. Hadn't expected the desperate mail-order bride to have done her homework. "Who told you that?" he asked, his voice losing some of its polish. "Does it matter? The point is, I know, and so does the sheriff." The sheriff. Prescott laughed, but it was harder now, less confident. "Tom Coulter? He's a washed-up drunk with a badge. He couldn't arrest his own shadow." "Then you won't mind when he shows up." Prescott's eyes narrowed. For the first time, Clara saw the mask slip completely. Behind the charm and the expensive clothes and the practiced smile was something ugly, something mean and small and dangerous. "You sent the boy," he said softly. "You sent the kid for help." Clara didn't answer. She didn't need to. Prescott turned to one of his men. "Find the brat. Bring him back." "Don't you touch him!" Jesse exploded, thrashing against the men holding him. "Don't you go near my son!" "Relax, Turner. Nobody's going to hurt your precious boy. I just can't have him running to town and ruining my perfectly reasonable conversation with my fiancée." "She's not your fiancée!" Jesse roared. "Actually, she is. Until she's legally released from our contract, she belongs to me, same as a horse or a piece of land. Property, Turner."
That's all a woman is in the eyes of the law. Clara slapped him. She didn't plan it, didn't think about it. Her hand moved on its own, fast and hard, and the crack of palm against cheek echoed across the yard like a gunshot. Prescott's head snapped sideways. When he turned back, the red imprint of her fingers was blooming across his face, and his eyes were murderous. "You want to do that again?" he whispered. "I want to do it every day for the rest of your life." Prescott grabbed her wrist. His grip was brutal. Clara felt the bones grind together, felt the pain shoot up her arm, but she didn't make a sound. She would not give him the satisfaction. "Let her go, Prescott." Jesse's voice was barely human now, low and guttural, and full of something that made even the hired men holding him shift nervously. "Or what? You'll kill me? You'll break every bone in my face? You can barely stand up straight, Turner. Face it, you're outmanned and outgunned, and the woman you're trying to protect just assaulted me in front of 4 witnesses." "Self-defense," Clara said through clenched teeth. "You grabbed me first." "My word against yours, darling. And in this territory, my word carries a lot more weight." He was right. Clara knew he was right. That was the sickening part. In the eyes of the law, in the eyes of this territory, Garrett Prescott was a wealthy, respected landowner, and she was a penniless mail-order bride living in another man's house. Her word was worth exactly nothing. But she had something Prescott didn't count on. "Actually," a voice called from the road, "her word carries plenty of weight when it's backed up by mine." Everyone turned. Mrs. Alma Beckett was climbing down from a wagon at the edge of the property. She wasn't alone. Behind her were 3 other women Clara recognized from town. The preacher's wife, the doctor's wife, the woman who ran the boarding house. They stood in a line, 4 women with hard faces and harder spines, and they looked at Garrett Prescott the way decent people look at a snake in the henhouse. "Mrs. Beckett," Prescott said, releasing Clara's wrist. His charm was back on like a coat. "What a pleasant surprise. Ladies, to what do we owe the honor?" "You owe it to Noah Hawkins," Mrs. Beckett said. "That boy came tearing into town like the devil was chasing him. Ran straight to my store because his papa told him I could be trusted." She looked at Jesse with something like pride. "Good man teaching your boy who to turn to." "The sheriff?" Jesse asked. "Wade Coulter is on his way. I sent my nephew to fetch him. He was at the Miller farm, so it'll take him a bit. But we didn't want to wait." "4 old women?" Prescott laughed. "This is your cavalry? I'm terrified." "You should be," Mrs. Beckett said calmly. "Because I'm not just 4 old women. I'm the woman who runs the general store where you buy your supplies." "That's Dorothy Mitchell,"
whose husband runs the only bank in 60 miles. That's Ruth Coulter, the sheriff's wife. And that's Martha Brennan, whose husband is the only doctor between here and Cheyenne. She took a step forward. Now, Garrett, you can keep playing your games, but when every store refuses to sell you grain, every bank refuses your deposits, every doctor refuses to treat your injuries, and every lawman in the territory has your name on a warrant, how long do you think you'll last in Wyoming? The yard went silent. Prescott's hired men looked at each other. This wasn't what they'd signed up for. They'd been paid to intimidate a lone rancher and drag a woman off his property. They hadn't counted on an ambush by the territory's most influential women. "You're bluffing," Prescott said, but the confidence was bleeding out of his voice. "Try me." Mrs. Beckett's eyes could have frozen a river in July. "I've been watching you operate for 3 years, Garrett. Watching you lure women out here with your lies, take their money, and throw them away like garbage. I should have spoken up sooner. I should have stopped you when that first poor girl came crying into my store with a black eye and a busted lip." Her voice cracked on the last words, and Clara saw something she hadn't expected. Guilt. Real, burning guilt in the older woman's eyes. "I didn't help her," Mrs. Beckett continued. "I told myself it wasn't my business. Told myself she must have done something to provoke him. Told myself all the comfortable lies we tell ourselves when we don't want to get involved." She looked at Clara. "I'm not telling those lies anymore." "Neither am I," Dorothy Mitchell said quietly. "My husband processed the bank transfers for 2 of those women. The money Garrett claimed was for wedding preparations went straight into his personal account. I have the records." "And I have the medical records," Martha Brennan added. "The girl with the black eye. The one who came before. My husband treated her injuries and documented everything. We kept it because we knew someday it would matter." Prescott's face had gone white. Not pale, white. The color of a man watching his entire, carefully constructed life collapse around him. "This is absurd," he sputtered. "You can't prove any of that. It's all hearsay and speculation and bitter women with grudges." "Bank records aren't hearsay," Dorothy said calmly. "Medical reports aren't speculation. And we're not bitter. We're done." One of Prescott's hired men quietly let go of Jessie and stepped back. Then another. Then the third. The one with the gun holstered it and held up both hands. "I was hired to deliver papers," he said. "Nobody said nothing about kidnapping and assault charges. I'm out." "Me too," said another. "Cowards," Prescott spat. "I'm paying you." "Not enough for prison," the first man said, already walking toward his horse. "Not near enough." Within a minute, all 4 men had mounted and ridden away. Prescott stood alone in the yard, surrounded by people who saw him exactly for what he was. Jesse wiped the blood from his lip and walked slowly toward Prescott. Not with violence this time, with something worse. Calm. "Here's what's going to happen," Jesse said. "You're going to get on your horse. You're going to ride to town. You're going to wait for Sheriff Coulter, and you're going to answer for every woman you've hurt, every dollar you've stolen, every lie you've told. And if I don't, then you can try to run, but I promise you, there's nowhere in this territory you can go where these women's names don't carry weight. You might outrun me. You might even outrun the sheriff. But you cannot outrun every store, every bank, every doctor, and every decent person between here and the Colorado border." Prescott looked from Jesse to Clara to the 4 women standing like a wall between him and any future he thought he had. His mouth opened, closed, opened again. For the first time, no smooth words came out. No charm, no lies. He was empty. "This isn't over," he said, but the words had no teeth.
They were the last gasp of a man who'd spent his whole life taking from people who couldn't fight back and had finally run into people who could. "Yes, it is," Clara said quietly. "It's been over since the moment you didn't show up at that station. You just didn't know it yet." Prescott stared at her for a long, hateful moment. Then he turned, mounted his horse, and rode east without looking back. Nobody spoke until the dust from his horse had settled and the sound of hooves had faded into the prairie silence. Then Mrs. Beckett let out a long breath and pressed her hand to her chest. "Lord Almighty," she said. "I haven't been that scared since my husband tried to teach me to drive a wagon." The tension broke. Dorothy Mitchell laughed. Ruth Coulter put her arm around Mrs. Beckett's shoulders. Martha Brennan sat down on the porch steps like her legs had given out. And Clara. Clara walked straight to Jesse and put her arms around him. She didn't think about it, didn't calculate, didn't wonder what the four most influential women in Elk Crossing would think about a housekeeper embracing her employer in broad daylight. Jesse's arms came around her, and he held on like a man who'd been drowning and just found solid ground. "You're bleeding," she said against his chest. "I'm fine." "You're not fine. You're bleeding, and you almost got shot, and you said you'd put a man in the ground." "I meant it." "I know you did. That's what scares me." "You scared?" Jesse pulled back just enough to look at her face. "The woman who slapped Garrett Prescott hard enough to leave a handprint? You're scared?" "Terrified," Clara admitted. "But not of him." Jesse studied her face. Something in his expression shifted, softened, cracked open the way things crack open when they've been held too tight for too long. Before he could speak, a small body slammed into both of them. Noah, gasping for air, red-faced, drenched in sweat from running to town and running back again. "Is he gone?" Noah panted. "Did I do it? Did the ladies come in time?" Clara dropped to her knees and pulled him into her arms. "You did it! You were so brave, Noah! You saved us!" "I ran so fast I fell down twice," Noah said proudly. "But I got back up both times." "That's all that matters," Jesse said, his hand on his son's head. "Getting back up." Mrs. Beckett approached them, her expression businesslike again. "Sheriff Coulter will be here within the hour. He'll want statements from all of you. I suggest we get everyone cleaned up and that lip looked at before he arrives." "Yes, ma'am," Jesse said. Mrs. Beckett looked at Clara. Hard. Measuring. Then her expression did something Clara had never seen it do before. It warmed. "You handled yourself well today," Mrs. Beckett said. "Better than most men would have. Hannah Hawkins would have been proud to know you're looking after her family." Clara's throat closed up. She couldn't speak, could only nod. Mrs. Beckett patted her shoulder once, brief and firm, the way women touch each other when words aren't enough, but silence says everything. Then she turned to organize the other women, because Mrs. Alma Beckett was the kind of person who organized things, and right now there were statements to prepare and a sheriff to brief, and justice to set in motion. Clara stayed on her knees in the dirt, with Noah in her arms, and Jesse's hand warm and steady on her shoulder. And she breathed. Just breathed. The Wyoming air filling her lungs, the sun on her face, the solid weight of a boy who trusted her, and the steady presence of a man who'd stood between her and danger without a second thought. She was still terrified, but she was also something else, something she hadn't been in a very long time. She was home. Sheriff Wade Coulter arrived 40 minutes later with 2 deputies and a face like a thundercloud. He was a big man, broad-shouldered and silver-haired, with the kind of quiet authority that didn't need a raised voice to make itself felt. He dismounted
took one look at Jesse's split lip and the red marks on Clara's wrist, and his jaw went tight as a steel trap. "Where is he?" Coulter asked. "Rode east," Jesse said. "About an hour ago." "He'll run for the territory line," one of the deputies said. "He won't make it." Coulter turned to his men. "Ride to Cedar Flat. Wire ahead to every station between here and Denver. I want his name on every sheriff's desk in Wyoming and Colorado by nightfall." The deputies mounted and rode hard. Coulter watched them go, then turned back to the group gathered on Jesse's porch. "All right," he said, pulling a notebook from his vest. "Who wants to go first?" Clara went first. She sat on the porch step and told the sheriff everything. The advertisement, the letters, the borrowed money, the empty platform, Prescott's threats, his men, the gun pointed at Jesse's head, the grip on her wrist that she could still feel, a ghost pain throbbing in her bones. Coulter wrote it all down without interrupting. When she finished, he looked at her wrist. "May I?" She held it out. The bruises were already darkening, 4 distinct fingerprints pressed into her skin like a brand. "Martha," Coulter called to the doctor's wife, "document these injuries. I want them recorded before they fade." Jesse went next. His account was shorter, harder, delivered in clipped sentences that cost him something to speak. He described being held by 2 men, the gun at his head, Prescott's words about Hannah. Clara watched Jesse's hands as he talked. They were clenched so tight his knuckles had gone white. Then Mrs. Beckett spoke, and then Dorothy Mitchell with her bank records, and then Martha Brennan with her medical files from the previous victim. Statement after statement, each one adding another stone to the wall, building around Garrett Prescott. When it was done, Coulter closed his notebook and let out a long breath. "I owe you ladies an apology," he said. "I should have moved on Prescott a long time ago. I had suspicions, but not enough evidence, and not enough." He paused. "Not enough spine, if I'm honest." "You're moving now," Mrs. Beckett said. "That's what matters." "It matters to me that women in my territory were hurt because I didn't act sooner." Coulter looked at Clara. "Mrs. Whitfield, I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure Garrett Prescott faces justice. But I need you to understand something. He's got money. He's got connections. He's going to hire the best lawyer territorial money can buy. And that lawyer is going to come after your credibility like a dog after a rabbit." "I know," Clara said. "He'll drag your past through the mud. Every job you've worked, every place you've lived. He'll make you look desperate and scheming and suggest you came here to defraud his client." "I know." "And you're still willing to testify?" Clara looked at Jesse, who was watching her with those dark eyes. At Noah, who'd fallen asleep on the porch swing with his head on a flour sack. At Mrs. Beckett and the women who'd driven out to a stranger's ranch because a 7-year-old boy had run to them for help. "I'm willing," she said. Coulter nodded. "Good, because we're going to need you. All of you." He put his hat back on and walked to his horse. "I'll be in touch about the hearing date. In the meantime, don't leave the territory, and don't be alone if you can help it. Prescott may be running, but cornered animals are the most dangerous kind." After the sheriff left, and the women said their goodbyes, the ranch settled into an uneasy quiet. Clara cleaned Jesse's split lip at the kitchen table while Noah slept on the sofa, finally exhausted from his heroic run. "Hold still," Clara said, dabbing the cut with a cloth soaked in warm water. "I am holding still." "You're flinching. Because it stings." "Big tough rancher can't handle a little sting?" Jesse looked at her. She was close enough to see the gold flecks in his brown eyes, the scar above his left eyebrow, the way his lashes were darker than his hair. He was close enough to see everything, and she didn't pull away. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for what you did today. Standing up to him, not hiding." "You told me to hide." "Since when do you do what I tell you?" Clara almost smiled. Almost. "I sent Noah out the back instead. Better strategy." "Much better. Kid ran 3 miles in under 20 minutes. I didn't know he had it in him." "He's got more in him than you think. More than he thinks." Jesse's hand came up and caught hers, the one holding the cloth. He didn't move it away from his lip, just held it there, his rough fingers wrapped around her wrist. Gently, so gently that the contrast with Prescott's grip made her throat ache. "Clara." "Don't." She heard the crack in her own voice and hated it. "Don't say something you'll take back tomorrow when the adrenaline wears off." "I don't take things back." "Everyone takes things back. Everyone says things in the heat of the moment that they don't mean when the moment cools down." "Is that what you think this is? Heat of the moment?" She pulled her hand free, set the cloth down, took a step back because she needed the distance, needed air between them that wasn't charged with whatever this was. "I think today was terrifying," she said carefully. "I think we both almost got hurt. I think emotions are running high, and neither of us should make decisions or say things that we can't unsay." Jesse stood. He was a head taller than her, and standing this close, she had to tilt her chin up to meet his eyes. He didn't touch her, didn't reach for her, just stood there and let her see his face without any mask or guard or pretense. "You're the most practical woman I've ever met," he said. "Someone has to be." Hannah was practical too. Different from you. She was soft where you're sharp, patient where you're direct. But she had the same thing you have. This way of seeing through all the nonsense to what actually matters. "Jesse, don't compare me to your wife." "I'm not comparing. I'm noticing. There's a difference." He picked up his hat from the table and turned it in his hands. "When Hannah died, I thought that was it. Thought whatever part of me was capable of feeling anything for a woman died with her. Figured I'd just work the ranch and raise my boy and count down the years until I could stop pretending I was okay. And now?" He looked at her. Just looked. And Clara felt it again, that cracking, that breaking open, that locked-down guarded thing inside her chest that had kept her alive for 12 years by keeping everyone out. "Now I'm not so sure," Jessie said softly. "That scares me," Clara whispered. "Scares me too." "Good. We should both be scared. That means we're paying attention." Jessie almost smiled, that ghost smile she'd seen a handful of times now, the one that transformed his face and made her forget how to breathe. "We should talk about the trial," Clara said, because she needed to change the subject before she did something foolish, like close the distance between them and find out what his mouth felt like against hers. "The sheriff said Prescott will hire a good lawyer. The best money can buy. And that lawyer will try to make me look like I came here to take advantage of you." "Let him try." "Jesse, listen to me. This is serious. They'll say I targeted you, that I saw a grieving widower with a ranch and a motherless child, and I manufactured this whole situation to get myself a comfortable life. Anyone who believes that is a fool. The world is full of fools. 12 of them will be sitting in a jury box, deciding whether to believe me or a man in an expensive suit." Jesse set his hat down. His expression shifted from soft to hard, the way it did when he stopped being the man and started being the rancher, the one who made decisions and carried them out without hesitation. "Then we make sure you're ready," he said. "We get every piece of evidence we can. Mrs. Henley's records from Boston, proving you paid for your own ticket. The bank records Dorothy's offering. Martha's medical files. Every letter Prescott sent you. We build a case so solid, his fancy lawyer can't poke a hole in it." "The letters." Clara stopped. Her face went still. "I had his letters. 4 of them. I brought them from Boston." "Where are they?" "In my suitcase."
"Upstairs." She was already moving. Jessie followed her up the narrow staircase to the guest room. Clara pulled her battered suitcase from under the bed and opened it. Her hands moved through the meager contents. The spare dress, the nightgown, her mother's Bible, the silver hairbrush. She stopped. "They're not here." "What?" Clara emptied the entire suitcase onto the bed, shook out every garment, checked every pocket and fold. Nothing. "They were here. I packed them at the bottom, wrapped in a cloth. 4 letters, tied with a ribbon." Jessie watched her face change as the realization hit. "The station," he said. "When you got off the train. Your suitcase sat on the platform for a while before I picked it up. And Prescott's been in town." Clara's voice went flat. "He knew I'd have his letters. He knew they could be used against him. Someone went through my suitcase and took them." "Can you prove what they said, from memory?" "I memorized every word." "But my memory isn't evidence. His lawyer will say I invented the contents." Jessie rubbed his hand across his face. "All right. We've lost the letters. That hurts, but it doesn't kill us. We've still got the bank records, the medical files, the sheriff's documentation. And we've got your testimony, and mine, and Mrs. Beckett's, and every other woman who's willing to stand up." "What if it's not enough?" Clara asked, and she hated how small her voice sounded. Hated the fear creeping back in. She'd been so strong in the yard, so defiant, so certain. But certainty was easy in the moment. It was the quiet hours afterward that ate you alive. "Then we fight harder." "Jessie, if we lose, Prescott walks free. He keeps doing this to other women. He keeps lying and stealing and hurting people, and nobody stops him because nobody can." "We're not going to lose." "You don't know that." "No, I don't." Jessie moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth coming off his body. "But I know this. I know you. I've watched you for 10 days. I've seen you scrub my floors and cook for my boy and stand up to a man with 4 armed thugs behind him without blinking. Whatever happens in that courtroom, you're not going to back down. That's not who you are." "You've known me 10 days, Clara said. "That's not enough to know who someone is." It was enough for Noah. The words landed like a hand on her heart. Clara closed her eyes. "He loves you," Jessie continued. "My son loves you. And that boy has the best instincts of anyone I've ever known. Better than mine. Better than Hannah's. He knew from the moment he saw you on that platform that you were worth running to, worth holding on to, worth screaming for in front of a whole town full of strangers." "He thought I was his mother." "No. He hoped you were his mother. There's a difference. But what he felt when he grabbed onto you, that was real. That was his heart recognizing something his mind couldn't explain. And I trust his heart more than I trust anything else in this world." Clara opened her eyes. Jessie was right there, inches away, his face open in a way she'd never seen it, unguarded, vulnerable. The rough, grieving, closed-off rancher, who couldn't talk about his feelings, was standing in front of her with his soul in his eyes. "What are you saying?" she asked. "I'm saying that 10 days ago, I offered you a job because my house was a mess and my boy was hurting. But somewhere between then and now, somewhere between the biscuits and the porch conversations and watching you slap Garrett Prescott across his worthless face, this stopped being a business arrangement for me.
Jesse, I'm not asking you for anything. I'm not expecting anything. I know you came here to marry one man and ended up working for another. And the last thing you need is more complications. But you told me once that you deal in what's real and solid and true. So here's something real. I care about you, Clara Whitfield. Not because you look like my dead wife. Not because you cook my meals and clean my house. Because you're the first person since Hannah who's made me feel like I'm not just taking up space. The silence that followed was so deep Clara could hear her own heartbeat. Could hear Noah stirring on the sofa downstairs. Could hear the wind pushing against the house like it was trying to get in. I don't know how to do this, she said finally. I've never done this. I've never had someone say things like that to me and mean them. How do you know I mean them? Because you're shaking. Jesse looked down at his hands. She was right. They were trembling. This man who'd faced down 5 armed men without flinching was shaking because he'd told a woman he cared about her. Guess I am, he said. Guess you are. They stood there in the small guest room with her meager belongings scattered across the bed and the evidence of Prescott's theft hanging between them. And something shifted, not dramatically, not with fireworks or grand declarations, just a quiet, steady turning, like a key finding its lock. We deal with the trial first, Clara said. We put Prescott behind bars. We make sure he never hurts anyone again. And then, she paused, then we figure out the rest. Fair enough. And Jesse, for the record, this stopped being a business arrangement for me about 3 days ago. When you sat on that porch and told me your wife said Wyoming was God showing off. Jesse's ghost smile appeared, but this time it stayed longer, grew warmer, almost reached his eyes. Hannah would have liked you, he said. Everyone keeps saying that. Because it's true. Then I wish I could have known her. You do know her. She's in every curtain she hung, and every recipe she wrote, and every word Noah remembers her saying. She's in this house. She always will be. I'm not trying to replace her, Clara said quickly. I know, and that's why this works, because you're not trying to be Hannah. You're just trying to be Clara. And it turns out, that's exactly what this family needed. A sound from downstairs. Noah's voice, sleepy and confused. Papa? Clara? Where'd everybody go? Be right down, son, Jesse called. He looked at Clara one more time, reached out and touched her hand. Just her fingers, barely a touch. But she felt it everywhere. Then he went downstairs to his boy, and Clara stood alone in the room that smelled like cedar and lavender, surrounded by everything she owned in the world, which wasn't much at all, and everything she was starting to feel, which was more than she'd ever allowed herself. She pressed her hand against her chest. The cracking was done. The wall was down. And Clara Whitfield, who'd survived 12 years by never letting anyone in, stood in a dead woman's guest room and let herself feel it all. The fear and the hope, and the fragile, terrifying possibility that maybe, just maybe, she'd found the place where she was supposed to be. The weeks before the trial were the hardest Clara had lived through, and she'd lived through plenty. Prescott was captured at the territorial line, trying to cross into Colorado with saddlebags full of cash and forged documents. Sheriff Coulter brought him back in handcuffs, and half the town turned out to watch him get locked in the Elk Crossing jail. But locked up didn't mean defeated. Within 3 days, Prescott's lawyer arrived from Cheyenne, Albert Grimes. Clara heard the name and felt cold settle into her bones. Grimes was known across the territory. He'd gotten a cattle baron acquitted of murder. He'd freed a railroad man who'd swindled 3 towns out of their savings. He was expensive, ruthless, and he didn't lose. Don't think about him, Jesse told her. Think about the truth. The truth doesn't always win. It does when you fight hard enough for it. The prosecutor, a young man named James Whitmore, came to the ranch twice a week to prepare Clara's testimony. He was earnest and smart, but Clara could see the doubt in his eyes. He knew what they were up against. "Grimes will attack your character," Whitmore said during their final session. "He'll suggest you came to Wyoming to defraud Prescott, that when his client wisely reconsidered the arrangement, you latched onto Mr. Hawkins instead. He'll paint you as an opportunist. And what do? You stay calm. You tell the truth. You don't let him rattle you." Whitmore paused. "And whatever you do, don't cry. The moment a woman cries on the stand, the jury stops listening to her words and starts judging her emotions." "I don't cry," Clara said. "Good, because Grimes will try to make you." The night before the trial, Clara couldn't sleep. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and listened to the house. Jesse's footsteps pacing in his room. Noah talking in his sleep, something about horses and flowers. The wind, always the wind, pushing and pulling at the walls. She got up and went downstairs. Jesse was already in the kitchen, sitting at the table with cold coffee and a face full of shadows. "Can't sleep either?" she asked. "Haven't slept in 3 days." She sat across from him. "You worried about the trial?" "I'm worried about you." He looked up. "About what they'll put you through. About whether it's fair to ask you to stand up there and be torn apart by a man who gets paid to destroy people." "You're not asking me. I'm choosing." "Are you? Or are you doing it because you feel obligated? Because I took you in and now you feel like you owe me?" "Jesse Hawkins, if you think I'm the kind of woman who testifies against a dangerous man out of obligation, you don't know me at all." "Then why?" Clara was quiet for a moment. "Because when I was 16 and alone and scared, nobody stood up for me. Nobody said, 'This is wrong and it needs to stop.' I survived, but I survived alone. And I swore that if I ever had the chance to be the person who stood up, I would take it. Not for you, not for obligation, for every woman who never had someone fight for her." Jessie stared at her across the table. The lamplight caught his face, and she saw something there she'd never seen before. Not the grief or the exhaustion or the careful control. Something luminous. Something that looked like awe. "Come here," he said. "Why?" "Because I want to hold your hand, and I can't reach you from over there." Clara moved to the chair beside him. Jessie took her hand in both of his. His palms were warm and rough and steady, and she let herself feel the weight of them, the solidness, the reality. "Whatever happens tomorrow," he said, "you're not alone. You haven't been alone since the day you stepped off that train." "I know," Clara whispered. "That's the scariest part." They sat together in the kitchen until the sky began to lighten, not talking much, just being. Two people who'd learned to carry their grief alone, sitting side by side in the pre-dawn dark, holding hands across a kitchen table, and letting that be enough. Noah found them there when he came down at sunrise. He stood in the doorway, rubbing his eyes, and looked at his father's hand wrapped around Clara's. A slow smile spread across his face. The kind of smile that starts at the mouth and works its way up to the eyes, and then just keeps going, filling the whole room with light. "Are we a family now?" he asked. Jessie and Clara looked at each other. "Yeah, son," Jessie said quietly. "I think maybe we are." Noah walked over, climbed into his father's lap, and reached across to put his small hand on top of Clara's and Jessie's joined ones. 3 hands stacked together. 3 broken people who'd found each other by accident and held on by choice. Outside, the sun came up over Wyoming, and the day of the trial began. The courthouse was packed before the doors even opened. Clara walked in with Jessie on one side
and Noah on the other, and every head in the room turned to watch. She kept her eyes forward, her back straight, her hands still. Prescott sat at the defense table in a new suit, freshly shaved, looking like a man on his way to Sunday dinner instead of a man facing 10 years in prison. When Clara passed his table, he smiled at her. That same oiled, confident smile he'd worn the day he rode onto Jesse's ranch. Like none of this was real. Like he'd already won. Albert Grimes sat beside him. Silver hair, cold eyes, hands folded on the table like a man who had all the time in the world. "Don't look at him," Jesse murmured. "Look at me." Clara looked at Jesse, at his clean shirt and his shaved jaw and the dark circles under his eyes that matched hers. He hadn't slept. Neither had she. But he was here, solid and steady and refusing to let her face this alone. "I'm okay," she said. "I know you are." Noah tugged her sleeve. "Clara, if the bad man says mean things about you, can I yell at him?" "No, sweetheart, but thank you for wanting to. Mama said lying was the worst sin, worse than stealing, worse than anything." Your mama was right. Mrs. Beckett had saved them seats in the second row. She was flanked by Dorothy Mitchell, Ruth Coulter, and Martha Brennan, the four women who'd driven out to Jesse's ranch with nothing but their reputations and their spines. They nodded at Clara as she sat down. No smiles. This wasn't the time for smiling. This was the time for war. The prosecution went first. Whitmore was nervous. Clara could see it in the way he shuffled his papers, the way he cleared his throat twice before speaking. But once he started, his voice steadied. He called Sheriff Coulter first. The sheriff described the arrest, the forged documents found in Prescott's saddlebags, the cash that matched withdrawal records from 3 different women's accounts. He was calm, professional, devastating. Grimes cross-examined with surgical precision. "Sheriff, isn't it true that Mr. Prescott cooperated fully upon his arrest?" "He cooperated after he ran 50 miles and got caught at the territorial line. I wouldn't call that cooperation." "And the documents you found, were they examined by a qualified expert?" "They were examined by Judge Harrison's clerk, who confirmed the territorial seal was forged." A clerk, not an expert. Grimes made a note. "Thank you, Sheriff." Then came the other women. 2 of them had traveled from neighboring territories to testify. The first was a woman named Sarah Dalton, thin and trembling, who described how Prescott had taken $300 from her under the pretense of wedding preparations, then vanished. "He wrote such beautiful letters," Sarah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He said he'd build me a house with a garden. He said I'd never be lonely again." The second woman, Margaret Cole, was harder, fiercer. She described arriving in Wyoming to find Prescott waiting, charming, attentive, and then the charm had stopped. He'd locked her in a room when she'd threatened to report him, kept her there 3 days without food. "Why didn't you go to the authorities?" Grimes asked during cross-examination. "Because he told me no one would believe me, that I was just a desperate woman who'd answered a newspaper ad, and my word wasn't worth the breath it took to speak it." "And were you desperate, Mrs. Cole?" "Every woman who answers those ads is desperate, sir. That doesn't make us liars." Clara watched the jury during the testimonies. 12 men. Ranchers, shopkeepers, a banker, a schoolteacher. Their faces were hard to read. Some looked sympathetic. Others looked skeptical. One man in the back row hadn't stopped staring at Prescott with what looked like admiration. Then Whitmore called Clara to the stand. She stood. Her legs were steady. Her hands were still. Jesse caught her eye as she walked past, and the look on his face gave her something she hadn't known she needed. Not courage. She had plenty of that. Permission. Permission to be herself up there. Not a perfect victim.
not a rehearsed witness, just Clara. She placed her hand on the Bible, swore to tell the truth, sat in the witness chair, and looked out at a room full of strangers who would decide whether her truth mattered. Whitmore took her through the story from the beginning. The advertisement, the letters,
The borrowed money, the empty platform, Prescott's absence, Jesse's offer of employment, and then Prescott's return.
"Describe what happened when Mr. Prescott arrived at the Hawkins Ranch," Whitmore said. "He came with 4 armed men. He told Mr. Hawkins to hand me over. When Mr. Hawkins refused, his men restrained him. One of them put a gun to his head." "And what did Mr. Prescott say to you?" "He said I was his property, that I belonged to him, that women don't always know what's best for them, and that's why God gave them husbands." A murmur rippled through the courtroom. The schoolteacher on the jury shifted in his seat. The man in the back row stopped admiring Prescott. "What happened next?" "He grabbed my wrist hard enough to leave bruises. I have photographs of the injuries, documented by Dr. Brennan's wife on the day of the incident." Whitmore entered the photographs into evidence. The jury passed them around. Clara watched their faces change as they looked at the dark fingerprints pressed into her skin. "Thank you, Mrs. Whitfield. No further questions." Grimes stood slowly. He buttoned his jacket, straightened his cuffs. Every movement deliberate, designed to make her wait, to make her nervous. Clara folded her hands in her lap and waited. "Mrs. Whitfield," Grimes began. "Or is it Mrs. Hawkins? I confess I'm unsure of your current marital status." "My name is Clara Whitfield. I'm not married." "Not married, and yet you live in Mr. Hawkins' home, sleep under his roof, care for his child, share his meals." Grimes paused. "That's quite an intimate arrangement for an employer and his housekeeper." "I have my own room. Mr. Hawkins has his. The arrangement is professional and proper." "Professional," Grimes smiled. "Let me ask you something, Miss Whitfield. When you answered my client's advertisement, what exactly were you hoping for?" "A fresh start." "A fresh start. And when my client failed to meet you at the station, what did you do?" "I stood on the platform, with nowhere to go and $17 to my name." And then Mr. Hawkins appeared, a grieving widower, a man with a ranch and a motherless child. And you, a woman with nothing, saw an opportunity. "I saw a man offering me honest work." "Or you saw a vulnerable man you could manipulate." Grimes turned to the jury. "Miss Whitfield arrived in Elk Crossing with nothing. No money, no family, no prospects. Within 10 days, she had installed herself in a widower's home, won over his child, and turned the entire town against the man she'd originally agreed to marry. That's not desperation, gentlemen. That's strategy." "It's survival," Clara said. "I didn't ask you a question, Miss Whitfield." "You were talking about me like I wasn't here. I thought I'd remind you." Someone in the gallery coughed. It sounded suspiciously like a laugh. Grimes's smile thinned. "Let's talk about the contract you signed with my client. You did sign it, correct?" "I signed a letter agreeing to a marriage arrangement, yes." "And in that letter, you committed to traveling to Wyoming to become my client's wife." "I committed to marrying him if he honored his end of the arrangement. He didn't. He wasn't at the station. He abandoned me." "He was delayed by business." "He was gone 3 days before I arrived. That's not a delay. That's a decision." Grimes picked up a paper from his table. "My client states that he sent money for your train fare. Do you deny receiving it?" "I deny it completely. I borrowed that money from my employer in Boston, Mrs. Agnes Henley. I have a letter from Mrs. Henley confirming the loan and the terms of repayment." Whitmore entered the letter into evidence. Grimes barely glanced at it. Letters can be fabricated, Miss Whitfield. So can claims about sending money.
Where's your client's receipt? Where's the telegraph office record? Where's any proof at all that he sent me a single cent? Grimes paused. It was brief, half a second. But Clara saw it. The flicker of a man who'd expected an easy target and found something else entirely. My client's financial records are his private concern. His financial records are the entire basis of his claim against me. If he sent money, prove it. If he can't prove it, then he's lying. And if he's lying about that, what else is he lying about? Miss Whitfield, I asked the questions here. Then ask better ones. The courtroom went dead silent. Grimes stared at her. Clara stared back. She could feel Jesse's eyes on her from the gallery. Could feel Mrs. Beckett's quiet pride. Could feel Noah's small, fierce presence in the second row, willing her to be strong. Grimes recovered. He spent the next 30 minutes trying to shake her. He asked about her past, about the boarding house in Boston, about why a woman her age had never married through conventional means. He implied she was damaged goods, suggested she'd been fired from positions, hinted that her character was questionable. Clara answered every question directly. No tears, no anger, no defensiveness. Just the truth, delivered in a steady voice that never wavered. I worked in a boarding house for 12 years, she said. I scrubbed floors and cooked meals and fought off men who thought a woman alone was an invitation. I didn't marry because I never met a man worth marrying. I answered your client's advertisement because I was desperate, and he knew that. He targeted women like me, women with no family, no money, no safety net, women who had no choice but to trust a stranger's promises. That's not strategy, Mr. Grimes. That's predation. Grimes had no more questions. The jury deliberated for 4 hours. Clara spent them in a small room off the courthouse, with Jesse and Noah and Mrs. Beckett pacing until Jesse told her she was wearing a groove in the floor. Sit down, he said. I can't sit. Then stand still. I can't do that either. Noah was sitting on a bench, swinging his legs. Clara, if the bad man goes to jail, does that mean you can stay forever? Clara stopped pacing. She looked at the boy who'd run across a train platform and changed her life. I'm staying regardless, sweetheart, no matter what happens in that courtroom. Promise? Promise. Jesse stood and walked to her. He didn't say anything, just took her hand and held it. His palm was sweating. The tough, unshakable rancher was as scared as she was. Whatever happens, he said. I know. I mean it. Whatever the verdict, win or lose, you're not alone in this. I know, Jesse. And Clara? What? When this is over, when all of it is done and the dust settles and we can breathe again, I want to ask you something. Something I've been wanting to ask for weeks. But I'll wait until this is finished, because you deserve to hear it without all this hanging over us. Clara's heart hammered. That's a cruel thing to say to a woman who's already pacing. Gives you something else to think about, besides the jury. I hate you. No, you don't. No, I don't. The bailiff came for them at 4:30. The courtroom was full again, every seat taken, people standing along the walls. Clara walked in and took her seat and felt the entire room holding its breath. The jury filed in, 12 men, 12 faces she'd memorized over 3 days of testimony. The foreman stood, an older man, a rancher from the look of his hands, with a weathered face and steady eyes. On the charge of assault, we find the defendant guilty. Clara's hands clenched in her lap. On the charge of attempted kidnapping, we find the defendant guilty. Jesse's hand found hers.
On the charge of forgery, we find the defendant guilty. Mrs. Beckett let out a small sound, like a prayer being answered. On the charge of fraud, we find the defendant guilty. Guilty. On every count. Every single one. Prescott's face went the color of ash. He turned to Grimes, whispering frantically. But Grimes was already packing his briefcase. The case was lost. The game was over. Judge Harrison sentenced Prescott to 12 years. No parole for the first 7. As the deputies led him out, Prescott twisted to look back at Clara. His face was twisted with hatred, but there was something else there too. Disbelief. He genuinely could not understand how a woman with nothing had beaten a man with everything. Clara met his eyes and didn't look away. "This isn't over," Prescott snarled. "Yes, it is," Clara said. "You just don't know how to lose." They led him out. The courthouse erupted. Mrs. Beckett was crying. Dorothy Mitchell was hugging Ruth Coulter. Sarah Dalton and Margaret Cole were holding each other in the back row. 2 women who'd finally been heard. Noah launched himself at Clara. She caught him and lifted him, and he wrapped his arms around her neck and squeezed until she couldn't breathe. "You won!" he shouted. "You won! You won! You won!" "We all won, sweetheart." Jesse was there, standing behind his son, his eyes red, his jaw tight with the effort of not breaking down in a courtroom full of people. Clara reached for him with her free hand, and he took it, and then he pulled both of them into his arms, Noah sandwiched between them, laughing and crying at the same time. "Ask me," Clara said against Jesse's shoulder. "What?" "Whatever you've been wanting to ask me. Ask me now." Jesse pulled back, looked at her, his dark eyes shining with something she'd never seen in them before. Not grief, not exhaustion, not the careful, guarded emptiness he'd worn like armor since the day his wife died. Joy. "Marry me," he said. "That's not a question." "Fine. Clara Whitfield, will you marry me? Not for convenience, not for protection, not because it makes practical sense. Because I love you. Because my son loves you. Because you walked into our broken lives and refused to let us stay broken." "Yes," Clara said. "Just like that? No conditions? No ground rules?" "Just like that." Noah's head whipped between them. "Does this mean you're my mama now? For real?" "For real," Clara said. "If you'll have me." "I've had you since the train station," Noah said matter-of-factly. "I was just waiting for Papa to catch up." They were married 2 weeks later in the small church in Elk Crossing. Clara wore her blue cotton dress, washed and pressed until it almost looked new. Jesse wore a clean shirt and the expression of a man who couldn't quite believe his luck. Noah stood between them as best man, and flower bearer, and ring holder, and anything else he could volunteer for. Mrs. Beckett sat in the front row and cried through the entire ceremony. She'd deny it later. Clara would let her. The Reverend kept it short. The vows were simple. "Do you take this woman? Do you take this man?" "I do. I do." When Jesse kissed her, gentle and firm and real, Noah cheered so loud the horses tied outside startled. They drove home in the wagon, the 3 of them on the bench seat, Noah between them because that was his spot and always would be. The prairie stretched out around them, golden in the late afternoon light, endless and wild and full of the kind of silence that had terrified Clara when she first arrived. It didn't terrify her anymore. "Papa?" Noah said. "Yeah, son?" "Remember when I saw Clara at the train station and I ran to her?" "I remember." "Were you mad at me for making a scene?" Jesse was quiet for a moment. "I was scared. Scared you were going to get your heart broken again. Scared I'd have to watch you lose someone else. But I didn't lose her. No, you didn't. Because I ran. Noah sat up straighter. Mama used to say that the good things don't come to you. You have to run to them. Even when you're scared. Especially when you're scared. Clara looked at this boy. This small, fierce, broken, brilliant boy who'd seen a stranger on a train platform and run toward her with everything he had. Who'd climbed out a window and sprinted 3 miles to save her. Who'd put his hand on top of theirs and asked if they were a family. Your mama was the wisest person I never met, Clara said. She'd say the same about you, Noah replied. The ranch appeared on the horizon. Their ranch now. Clara's and Jesse's and Noah's. The house with its wraparound porch and wild garden and curtains that smelled like lavender. The barn where Jesse worked from dawn to dusk. The chicken coop where Noah forgot to collect eggs. The porch where Clara stood every evening, watching the sky turn colors she didn't have names for. It wasn't much. It wasn't grand. But someone had loved this place once. And now, someone loved it again. Jesse pulled the wagon to a stop and set the brake. Clara climbed down before he could help her, because she'd been climbing down on her own for 26 years, and old habits died hard. But she reached back up for Noah, and the boy jumped into her arms without hesitation. Full trust, complete faith, the way children love when they decide to love, with nothing held back. "Welcome home, Mrs. Hawkins," Jesse said. Clara looked at him, at his rough, honest face and his dark, steady eyes, and his calloused hands that could mend a fence and hold a child, and touch her cheek with a gentleness that still surprised her. She looked at Noah in her arms, this boy who'd given her a name before she'd earned it, and then waited patiently while she grew into it. She looked at the house and the land and the sky that went on forever. "I've been home since the day I got here," she said. "I just didn't know it yet." They walked inside together, Jesse's hand on her back, Noah running ahead to check on the chickens he'd forgotten that morning. The door swinging open to a kitchen that smelled like bread and coffee and the faint memory of lavender. Clara Whitfield had boarded a train in Boston with a broken suitcase and $17, and nothing to lose because she'd already lost everything. She'd come to Wyoming to marry a liar who'd left her standing alone on a platform in the dust. She'd been threatened and grabbed and dragged into a courtroom and had her entire life picked apart by a man in a silver suit. And she'd won. Not because she was lucky, not because the system worked, because a 7-year-old boy had run across a crowded platform and grabbed a stranger and said the one word that changed everything. Mama. That was the beginning. This was the rest of the story. A ranch in Wyoming, a man who loved her without conditions, a boy who'd chosen her before she'd chosen herself, a life built not from the plans she'd made, but from the ruins of the plans that fell apart. Clara stood in the kitchen of the house that was now hers, and listened to Noah laughing in the yard, and Jesse's boots on the porch, and the wind pushing through the grass like a hymn. She pressed her hand against her chest. The wall was gone. The lock was broken. The guarded, protected, closed-off thing she'd carried for 12 years had cracked open on a train platform and shattered in a courtroom. And now there was nothing left but the raw, terrifying, magnificent truth. She was loved. She was home. She was exactly where she was meant to be. And for the first time in 26 years, Clara Whitfield Hawkins was not afraid.